So it is an honor for me to introduce Dr. Jean-Pierre Vaillancourt. Some of you may know or know that he's a world-renowned scientist. For those of you that do not know Dr. Vaillancourt, he obtained a DVM and a master's at the University of Montreal. Then, I guess the University of Minnesota was very fortunate to have him as a student because he obtained his PhD here. But he also has held positions at other different universities, including University of Guelph, North Carolina State University, National University of Mexico, the School of Veterinary Medicine in Toulouse, France, and actually he's a full professor at the University of Montreal. Those of you that do not know him, he has extensive experience in the poultry industry as well. And he has challenged the poultry industry to really pay attention and consider compliance from a biosecurity perspective, right? So he has challenged them to be successful from that standpoint so that we can control and prevent infectious diseases. And now he'll do the same, or he has been doing the same, actually, for the swine industry. So he's going to talk to us about biosecurity in the swine industry, and he's going to challenge us to do a better job today. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Vaillancourt.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. I would like to thank the organizing committee they tend to invite me every 5 years. It's kind of fun because I can see the crowd change. People seem to be getting younger. And I recognize less and less of you. I don't know if it's my age, but that's the way it is. Yeah, I've been around. My daughter once asked me if we were in a relocation program because of that. But I'm very pleased today that I get the opportunity to talk about biosecurity and about Bob, because those of you who've heard me talk about biosecurity, you'll recognize a few slides, but most of them are totally new. Because it's about Bob Morrison and his legacy and how I can connect that with compliance and biosecurity. So for me, I see 3 pillars for biosecurity, and the first 2 go back to ancient texts, Old Testament, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, check it out. We have not invented anything, okay? And what it's about reducing sources of contamination and then bringing a distance between any source of contamination and healthy hogs, in our case. And of course, there's a third one that's more of a modern pillar, and that has to do with a regional biosecurity. And that requires communication, and it's easier said than done. If we lined up these different pillars with the risks that we find in swine, I see 3 big categories. You have location. That includes aerosol transmission, insects, having basically high regional density of farms, proximity type of neighbors, that kind of stuff. That's all location driven. And then you have, of course, the pigs themselves and management, right? So you have that list. It's general, but I think I cover over 95% of what are the risks out there, including feed and semen and all that, when it comes to swine health. And for each one of these risks, you can find a measure of biosecurity that has to do with reducing a source or bringing separation or having a global, regional aspect to biosecurity. And then there's a 4th column that I label human. Because for virtually all the risks and the measures of biosecurity, what we notice is that you have human issues, per se. So, a couple of slides to show you what, on the poultry side, because that's the thing. You don't know me because I forgot to mention that when I graduated from here, I got 3 job offers. 2 were postdocs in swine, 1 was a faculty position in poultry. And so I followed the money, and I've been doing that ever since, okay? And in poultry, these are our pet peeves. People should know how to clean and disinfect. They don't do it properly. Sometimes they disinfect without cleaning. They don't wait. They don't use dryness as they should. There's all sorts of factors. They don't audit it. Biofilms, water is often neglected. At the bottom, you see a list of pathogens you don't want to see on swine farms. And yet, they are present. It's been documented in biofilms, bringing, of course, antibiotic resistance and stuff like that. So that's an issue. And then there's building design and layout. And here, just a quick comment. We're having farms that are bigger or sites that are bigger, bigger, and bigger. And I think that will be a problem if it's not already. Again, because the bigger the site, the more you get people, the more you have people, the more it's an issue to manage biosecurity. So that's why it's problematic. It's got advantages, but in terms of biosecurity, it's a challenge. There's other factors in there. Today, I'm going to focus a lot on anterooms because that's often a problem, although we do know how to do it right if we really want to, okay? Here, I have a picture of an old grandmother and some tree huggers, granola people with a few pigs. I put that in just to let you know that as I criticize the size of farms, I very much believe in commercial production, industrial level production, okay? We don't have enough grandmothers to feed everybody, or tree huggers, people with small outfit. There's a tendency to go there. In France and Europe, you see more and more outside production, including in pigs. In France and Corsica, they go way beyond that. What they do now is that they produce pigs outside, and they commingle pigs from different farms on the same site. How about that? Okay. So these things I'm not in favor of, but I think we need to be very careful when we go bigger and bigger. I said that anteroom design or anterooms are an issue. We did a study where we managed to be able to film people, okay? So long story, we got the ethics certificate to do that, but we had hidden cameras. So we have very valid data. And we could demonstrate that the odds of doing things right depended on having enough space, having the equipment. You know, if you're asked to wash your hands and there's no soap, you have a problem, okay? Having just a line versus a bench, having a bench, you'll be more likely, 5 to 9 times more likely to comply because it's more obvious, it's not something you can neglect. So we know that. And compliance is an issue. It's been an issue. I've been traveling around. I've been on farms in 26 countries so far. And everywhere I see the same thing. And that's normal because it's a people game, and there's people everywhere. And essentially what we did is that we went on 24 farms. This is data on 8. They were farms where in the anteroom, the biosecurity rules were listed on a poster, but that was it. No intervention, okay? We didn't do anything to encourage them. We just let them do what they were supposed to do. And they were supposed to change their boots, wash their hands, put on coveralls, do a transition between 2 zones properly. And you can see with that data, the boots, about half the time was done well. Respecting the zones, only 15% of the time. Hand washing, 36%, because we had 20% women in there. If we had only men, probably it would have been 25%, okay? Compliance. Overall, coveralls was not that bad. People don't want to get dirty, but the overall compliance was very low. And this is not a Quebec thing or a Canadian thing. I see that everywhere I go. So that's a big deal. And it really sucks, okay? And it sucks more than you think. Because I've had situations talking to people in integrated companies, and I discovered that the closer they get to the CEO, the more they have this attitude that if I say something for the farm, it's done on the farm, okay? No, that's not always happening. Okay? And there's a quote from Mark Twain that's interesting because there's one coming from a mentor of Bob Morrison that is a bit different, but comes close to that as well. We'll see that in a minute. I don't have personal data much on swine. This is data from a farm in France where I did a sabbatical where we had like beacons that would allow you, the employees, we had 3 employees, they had on their phone an app. If they would get within a meter of a beacon, it would register them. And this way we could tell if they were going in the right direction, you know, they were not going from the farrowing unit to gestation, for example, things like that. And what we saw is 2 were not too bad. 1 had double the incidence of going in the wrong direction or not doing things right. And this is what we see. We see that people are not uniformly not compliant. There's a lot of variability in compliance depending on the individual, and that's very important. That's why I'll be talking about Bob. Again, a people issue. We know it's important to create a biosecurity culture, and that requires 4 big things. The first one, of course, the environment, right? You need to have the right design. You need to have the material. You need to, if you're going to have to wash your hands, you need to have water or at least a disinfectant, you know, like Purell, something like that. Everything else is about people, okay? These things have been shown to be associated with compliance, including personality traits. Now, you cannot really change somebody's personality, okay? But remarkably, you can change what is called the emotional intelligence of people. And we'll be talking a lot about this morning, okay? Their motivation, their attitude, that can be changed. And the way you do it is by good communication, in particular via feedback. And so we're working on that right now in research, because these 2 things that can then be used to custom design training. You go on YouTube, you can find all sorts of training programs about biosecurity. Some of that is hilarious. I actually use that for teaching. I show that to students and say, okay, what's wrong with this, okay? So, and it's often one size fits all. That's not the way to go. So you can see 3 out of 4, it's a people issue. That brings me to Bob. Bob, as you know, was from Canada, from Western Canada, but most people don't know that Bob spent a lot of formative years just north of Montreal in Quebec. And I believe that's probably where he got his funky side, okay? Here he is, we're in the mid-'80s. He was there because Marta Fuentes was just defending her master's degree. He's with a Burt Reynolds lookalike, a Leman, right? And he looks like a choir boy. He looks like a librarian. When I first saw him, I was like, who's that? This guy was hired to eradicate pseudorabies. And I thought, not sure he's going to go very far. He doesn't come across as somebody very assertive. We had assertive people in the swine group at that time, okay? Exhibit 1, Carlos Pijuan. You can see a difference in style, okay? Can you notice that Carlos is kind of leaning against Bob? And Bob keeps smiling, and he's just giving him a little bit of space, but he's standing his ground. Now, when he arrived in '86, we looked at him, and soon after, Carlos had a party at his house. It was October. Bob showed up dressed with something that looked like this. We were two other Canadians. The other one came to me and said, JP, we've got to call Ottawa and get this guy's passport revoked, okay? This is shameful. Of course, it was at a time when we didn't have phones with cameras, so we have no pictures of this. There was one Kodak moment that was missed, and it was not a picture of Bob, but it was a picture of Carlos's face looking at Bob when he arrived, dressed like that, okay? We soon realized that Bob was a bit of an extrovert type. He didn't look like it at first, but he was not afraid to flash a bit, and yet it was not really in his personality, okay? So I just was still trying to figure him out. Another reason for this, he had just started, got a graduate student from Asia, and he was doing a clinical trial, all right? And as you know, a clinical trial, in veterinary medicine, it's always at least single blind because the pigs don't know in which group they are. But you want at least double blind, if not even triple blind, right? Because then the person who does the analysis doesn't know which group is what, and that's perfect. Now, my office as a graduate student was next to Bob's lab. The lab was essentially a windowless place with a DOS machine. That's all we called it. There was a floppy disk you would put 5¼ inch, and it was a black screen with a little bit of green at the bottom, and his students was entering data. And one morning, Bob left a note. It said, "Hi, do you have the key to the codes to identify what is what?" Because he could no longer find his key. So I went to him and I said, "Congratulations, Bob, you just created the first quadruple blind clinical trial. Fantastic." So I thought, this is not going to, this guy's got no future. And yet, as you know, he did. And he became a leader. So how did this happen? And why am I talking about Bob's legacy as it relates to biosecurity? As far as I know, he never wrote a paper strictly about biosecurity, okay? Well, first of all, and you're going to see it was part of his emotional intelligence. Bob was good at listening, and he would get information from mentors. You have two of them there, Leman and Otto Ratostis. And you see that quote from Ratostis, "You make more mistakes not looking than not knowing." So, and Bob was very good at looking. He was really curious. And Al here saying, "Do where that matters." That's not from Bob, that's from Al. And Al would also say, "Don't be afraid of making mistakes." One day, he got us in a room, all the graduate students, saying, "I'm concerned about you." And we were like, geez, this is the leader of the group. He says, "You guys don't make mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, that means you're not pushing it." We're saying, now, don't burn down the building, but if you make a mistake, I want you to know that I'll back you up, okay, as long as you're trying to innovate to do something like that. Bob got that. Here's an example. This is a paper that he wrote with John Dean about managing competing responsibilities in the United States industry. So that's the conclusion. I know you cannot read it. That's why I put the keywords there. Look at that. Gather data relentlessly. Question your interpretations. Embrace your enemies. Trust the shuffler, but cut the deck anyway. Be unpredictable. Disregard all the rules. That doesn't sound like a choir boy or a librarian, right? This is a guy who basically listened to his mentors and tried to get something done, trying to be original. What was original as well with Bob is that he wanted to be an epidemiologist. Okay, need to realize what you see here is a word map. If you put down veterinary epidemiology, what comes out, and this is in 2016, dairy and cattle. It's still true today. Most veterinary epidemiologists are dairy people, okay? You'll have a hard time to find swine in there, but it's in there, okay? I did a search on academia.edu for pig epidemiology and swine epidemiology. You get more hit with pig epidemiology, almost 100,000 hits. But look, from 1999 to 2022, it's fairly recent that it's like a well-known thing, many papers coming out about swine epidemiology. Bob started this in '86. And he had that at a time when it was not popular. It's still not popular. If you ask veterinary students about epidemiology, they tend not to like it too much. In England, they ask veterinarians and veterinary students to put words that they associate to different, within our profession, different domains. And this is what comes out for epidemiologists and public health officials. Okay? And at that time, when Bob was trying to push this, Carlos was saying to him and to me, an epidemiologist is like a big macrophage that gobbles up data and poops p-values. Is it really good? Well, if you keep it at that, if you keep it to be what I call an armchair epidemiologist, I think it's got limitations. But Bob understood this. That's why he also wanted to be a clinician. And for those of you who are in the field, you're going to feel pretty good. Look at the words associated about production animal general practitioners, right? So that was critical for Bob. Yeah, he wanted to do epidemiology, but he knew that he had to be connected to the field. He could not just focus on getting data to poop p-values. That wouldn't do it. And it was very important because at that time, there was nothing coming out about disease control when it comes to epidemiology or biosecurity. This is, again, academia.edu. We have about 11,000 papers, 12,000 about pig biosecurity or swine biosecurity, and most of them are after 2000. Okay. So what's the deal about Bob Morrison? First of all, he had what we call self-awareness. He was motivated. So here is a model. This guy wanted to be a teacher, right? It has been said many times. He was a learner. He could learn on his own, and he would be motivated. He had this desire to grow and to be a more effective trainer. What was great about Bob is because he was a good listener, he would use what others were providing, okay? Observations and all that, getting a feedback that would bring better self-awareness, self-confidence, recognizing your triggers, knowing your beliefs, your emotion, knowing your relationship patterns. He had a way, look at this. This is Montse, who kind of looked like a priest about to bless Peter and Bob. I don't know what was going on there, but they were smiling, so that's good, right? These relationships, these connections, Bob was extremely good at getting something out of it because he was very much aware of himself, who he was, and motivated. I mentioned he loved teaching. This is a quote directly from him. And my point here is that the reason he loved teaching, he never said it this way, but it's because he was getting something out of it as well. It's not a one-way street. These fertile minds, graduate students, colleagues, and all that, were providing something to him. So it was a two-way street, per se. This is, when I tried to get pictures about Bob, I got one that was this board. So I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know if it was about PERS or something else. Turns out it was about PERS. I asked John, do you think that's from Bob? And this is his answer in my email. Yep, 99% sure, because it looks like his, and he always went to the whiteboard at meetings, okay? He was driven. So that's extremely important. But another thing that you'll notice that's different from anybody else here who would look at controlling PERS is this particular point at the end of his plan. 6 was celebrate. Who writes stuff like that? Celebrate. Okay, so Let's pay attention to that. At the meeting, did he start that per se? Was he did he have the original idea? I don't think so. But he did set up the rules, right? He wanted to learn, he wanted to share, and he wanted to have fun. And you'll see that this was ingrained in his personality, and you'll see why it's relevant when it comes to biosecurity compliance. This guy had good self-management. He knew how to relax, okay? He knew how to connect with friends that would help him develop per se as a human being, and that's critical. That got him to have a sense of social awareness that's beyond belief, okay? I'll be mentioning at the end, Bob was intelligent, of course, but he was not like Einstein of veterinary medicine or stuff like that. But in terms of his emotional intelligence, his ability to socially interact, his awareness of others, how he understood how other people really felt, okay, or how to communicate with them, was remarkable. I'll give you an example. Last time I saw him, 2013. We're at an event like last night, and we're having a drink and all this, and I'm talking as I always do. And at one point, he just smiled, and he said to me, JP, you know, you haven't changed at all. And I thought, what do you mean I haven't changed at all? I gained 30 pounds, I lost my hair. And then, I said, you mean I won't shut up? And he just smiled, okay? Now, other people could have got me mad there if he would have been like, you just won't shut up. No, it was like, isn't that fascinating that you're still talking like this after 30 years, you know? He was trying to get something, trying to figure me out, okay? And that's important because that allows you to really know how to interact with people, okay? That's the last part of the puzzle. Relationship management. At the top, you see a quote directly from him, who was saying, I was not, when I started, he was in practice at the beginning, even in Prince Edward Island, like way out on an island in the middle of the Atlantic. And he didn't have a lot of knowledge, but he said, I cared. And he said, that's probably more important to care than to know it all. And so he had empathy. And he knew he had the skills to be assertive and yet not to hurt anybody. And you see at the bottom quotes from colleagues who may be here right now. Look at the bottom one. It says, you know, he would say, you shouldn't have said something, but said most importantly, sometimes he would say, wow, you did a great job with that. I don't know if that's happened to you, that somebody would say that and you can tell it's bullshit. Right? They're just trying to kiss your butt. But with Bob, you knew that was not the case. And that's critical because we can sense when people are real. And that it was Bob, okay? So what I just described is part of a model that they use in psychology about emotional intelligence, right? You need to have self-awareness that allows you to do self-management, gets you to be socially fine, and then that helps you build relationships, okay? So this is the model of emotional intelligence, and what's great about it, although we cannot change our personality, we can improve our emotional intelligence. And that has an impact on compliance in many businesses. I work with an industrial psychologist, and when he looked at the data which show him about swine, poultry, and all that, and he says, how come you guys don't seem to be paying more attention to people? Isn't that a people's business? Because he says, I work with other businesses where they have much more emphasis on how to reach individuals, how to get them to grow. But I said, you know, when you're paying somebody a few bucks an hour to shovel manure, you just take whoever you want. You can, actually, not who you want, what you can. So I said, it's not as if we can be very difficult, but he says, don't care about that. They're still people, and they can be improved, and we have evidence of that, okay? But the key thing about Bob is that he knew how to break barriers. Henson in California came up with this list of barriers to collaborations, okay? He said essentially, that's how it is. You have an insular culture in businesses, in integrated companies. Fix your own problem. You don't want to get involved too much because by fear of looking stupid. Bob had no problem with that, you could see. And then hoarding, because the data is power. People want to keep the data for themselves. And after that, you have big organizations. They are with sites all over the place, distance. All these things play a role with often a network that's poor when it comes to communication. Now, we have everything, we're all online now and all this, but that doesn't mean that we are effectively communicating. And then the last thing is transfer of knowledge. We're not very good at that. Bob seemed to be able to bridge or to break all these barriers, okay? When I looked at this list, except for physical distance and size of organizations, Bob had abilities to break barriers and bring on collaborations. And proof of that, I looked at his papers, and here you have a list of co-authors of Bob Morrison, okay? If you co-wrote something with Bob, your name is not there, you're just making my point, okay? He had a lot of collaborators, a lot of people to work with. So he was not just going at it on his own. He knew how to get people to work with him, okay? And again, he was listening to people. Here's another evidence. This thing about the Swine Health Monitoring Project, before it became the Morrison Swine Health Monitoring Project, it was not his original idea per se, or I guess it is, but he was listening to others, saying, hey, you gave us information that's useful that I can use. If you would share that, maybe we could benefit all of us. And that's why when he created that, he came up with, we can do much better if we share each other's data, not in a blaming way, but in a learning way for prevention, okay? So that's because his mindset and his ability was there. But he went further. Because he was in the field, because he understood that a p-value would not get him to convince decision makers, he got an MBA so that he would be able to come up with cost-benefit analyses, okay? He understood that you cannot just go, in academia could say, look, good biosecurity is all of this, do all of this. He knew that's not often possible. The question is, where should you prioritize? Where do you get the biggest bang for the buck? He got set up to do that. So he managed to get collaborations, to get data, to get information and knowledge so that you could make decisions. This is another proof of this. Control elimination of PERS. He's talking about biosecurity priorities, not doing it all, just fixing the priorities. Be cost effective. Okay, that was his emphasis. So I'm going to basically summarize this way. You have emotional intelligence. If you're not convinced that this is important, you need to know that this is the #1 predictor of future job performance for anyone in any kind of businesses, okay? As a matter of fact, if you have a manager that's got a high degree of emotional intelligence, you will see a reduction up to 60% in turnover of employees, okay? So it's serious stuff. It can be very useful. I'll get back to it. It's got a tremendous impact on compliance, okay? I'll make these slides available in PDF if you want to, but you look at self-awareness, better control of your behavior, easier to follow rules because of social awareness. There's a long list of factors that result in higher compliance, no matter what the business is about, okay? So Bob had this emotional intelligence. He used it to get data, okay? In between, well, you have the facilities, of course, it needs to be there, and you have the training. But he understood that to get proper training, you needed to get information. You needed to connect with the people, not only on a personal basis or one-on-one on a given farm, but also regionally speaking. That was the power of what he was getting into, okay? And he understood that compliance was an issue. This is, again, a quote from something he wrote in 2011. Look at the bottom. He's talking about biofilters, and it says how great it is and how it pays for itself within a year and all that. But at the same time, he's saying if you let the virus go through the front door, that's not a great investment then, okay? So he understood this thing about compliance. So we have a lack of compliance. And it's due mainly to some physical things, economics, times, so that's at the top. But then everything else is about beliefs, attitude, people, the way they're trained or not trained, how they're being approached, and all this, okay? And that's all connected to 5 things. Okay, the design of facilities, how easy it is to do what we're being asked to do, knowledge that we may have. Keep in mind that when you're training people, you're training adults. You're not training kids. So they need to have the knowledge to understand why they need to do something, and that requires feedback, okay? Regular feedback. And then you have this regional perspective. To do that, we believe that we have 2 avenues. The first one is to use sensors. We need to innovate to provide feedback because we cannot always be watching in the anteroom or elsewhere on the farm. We need to be able to provide feedback, and we need to look at emotional intelligence, okay? They've done that in human medicine. Here is data from a hospital. They had intensive care unit. Their compliance level for hand washing and all this was 50 to 60% in 2 departments, okay? That's not good, mainly if you're in that bed, okay, with these people. They could bring it up, and 6 months after they started having intensive training, frequent and visible monitoring, immediate feedback, real-time data available to managers, okay, they could bring compliance at over 90%, okay? So and the way they use that is they had sensors so that when people would get in, they would need to activate, for example, the Purell dispenser. If they did not do that, it would be recorded. So they had data they could use for training. So sensors are really great because they're the best. What you have here is different options. You can do a survey, you can do audits. Audits, of course, they're needed, they're good, but they have limitations. An audit will show that there's an empty room. An audit will show that there's water access and soap. It doesn't mean people will wash their hands, right? So, and you can have cameras. We've done that. If you just put on cameras, after 3 weeks, nobody cares. That's why reality TV works. People will do stupid things in front of a camera because they forget, okay? So sure, you could go and say, well, we'll get snippets of videos to show them when they do something wrong, and even better when they do something right for training, except that that's costly. Sensors, first of all, it's no cameras, which, you know, HR kind of like that when you're not filming people, but it allows you to get data to reflect compliance. You get data for training, you have continuous monitoring, data, super value. So we're working on this. We used the French, it was a French system on farms once as a proof of concept. And, but we had only 1 antenna to do the detection, so we asked employees if we could microchip their shoes, their personal shoes. They accepted for this little thing, but they said, don't make that a habit, right? And so we had a system with a direct alarm if they crossed the antenna with their own shoes versus the company boots. And if they did not activate the Purell dispenser, they would also have an alarm. And what happened is that we saw better biosecurity, at least short term. You haven't read what we got when we first did that without any intervention. And then you look at 2 farms in green and brown, and you can see that boot compliance went way up, and hand washing was also up. Was not great, was up. And at the far right, you can see we had 7 individuals, and you have, in the orange, if they reacted to the alarm, their compliance went up. You can see 2 things there, is that there was a lot of variation depending on the individual, and some people reacted to the alarm, some did not, okay? So now we're going to have a project that's funded by Chic, where we're going to look at a system with 2 antennas so that we don't need to chip people's shoes, and we'll be able to gather data, real-time data, get the alarms, and we might even consider making it a bit more human nature proof. I didn't say idiot proof, human nature proof, by having a system where, the door won't open to get in if you don't do things properly, right? And the idea is to get that for training purposes. When I talked to our industrial psychologist about this, I said, I'm a bit disappointed. I thought that the alarm would freak them out and they would all comply. Well, he said it's not that easy, okay? He said, when you're dealing with emotional intelligence, there's so much variability depending on individuals. But he said, what's key there is you need to find ways to motivate them. And the way you do that is you show them their performance and you allow them to compare themselves to others. But it has to be done in a positive way. If you can do that and you have an incentive program, doesn't mean a lot of money, could be anything. But if you have some incentives, based on performance, you're going to see compliance going way up, okay? And a lot of companies do that. He told me that, but I figured I'll check it out. Here you have, I just did a Google on it. I got this website talking about 4 companies, Cargill, Google, Screwfix, I don't know what they do, but Netflix, 3 out of 4, I think we all know. And these guys offer at least daily feedbacks to employees, okay? And they're big, successful companies. So, if Bob would be here today, I think that, and looking at the talks that we've heard over the past 2 days, we're in an environment where things are changing. That's always been the case, but it seems to be picking up. There's not only climate change, there's so many things that seem to be different. We probably need to look at a paradigm shift on how we're doing things. And it's true when you look at risks, okay? The risks, the challenge that we face is always a moving target. We need to rethink what we do, not only on farms, but in terms of regionality. And I believe that swine people are ahead of poultry people on this. Last week, I was in Italy at a World Veterinary Poultry meeting, and I told them that. I was a keynote like this, and I said, this is a bitching session, okay? Because you guys are falling behind the swine people. Amazingly, they kind of liked what I said, okay? They appreciated to hear it like that. They could not fire me, right? I'm a professor, so I told them that this way. But it's true, okay? You guys, with things like Bob's initiative, to get data from different companies, well, is ahead. You're ahead there, okay? You need to improve, though. You need to improve, and that will require technology, innovation, and you need to work on emotional intelligence. Just look at the anteroom, right? Here is the recipe to increase your compliance in an anteroom. It's a list of things. You need to reach the right people. How many times do I get training programs for the grower? And I don't see the employees. Okay, we see that in Canada. I think that's a problem. We need to reach these people, and we also need to get their buy-in. They need to contribute. Biosecurity is a situation when reinventing the wheel is not a bad thing, okay? They need to come up with solutions, okay? They need to be able to do things simply, leadership is important. I did an audit once in North Carolina where I noticed that management was not taking showers. All the employees had to, not management. I said, why not? And they said, oh, well, we know where we've been. So what kind of bullshit is that? You know what you've been. You know, where have you been stepping lately? You know? I mean, so you need good leadership. I saw that with 2 different companies in North Carolina, where at one point you had shower and shower out facilities for breeders in turkeys. And they had 165 employees in the integrated companies just for the breeder side. And I asked them, we did that in Spanish, we got their confidence, we talked about soccer before and all that, so they were quite open. And we asked them, is everybody using the showers? And they say, no, not everybody. And in particular, management. And they say, if they feel they're clean enough, so are we, right? So that's a problem. We need that. We need to provide feedback. We need to have the right design, of course, training sessions and all that. When you look at this, there's 2 things that will come out, is that a lot of these points are technology can improve things. Okay, you can have, with the right technology, you can improve these different aspects. And when you look at emotional intelligence, I just highlighted here all the different aspects of that, of these points related to higher compliance and empty rooms that have to do directly with emotional intelligence, okay? And if you add what Bob's was doing, gathering data, you will just improve the training and you'll be able to prioritize properly. So what is Bob's legacy, in my view, when it comes to biosecurity? As I mentioned, Bob was no Einstein, but he was not stupid, that's for darn sure. He was intelligent, okay, but there's nothing extraordinary except for his emotional intelligence. That was actually remarkable. And on top of that, he had 4 desires, right? Desire to learn, curiosity, desire to solve problems, desire to share, and the desire to have fun, okay? These 4 things, with his abilities to connect with people, allowed him to have collaborators, to have collaborations, to get people's trust, and to actually be a leader. The guy who looked a bit like a clown at the beginning to me turned out to actually be a leader, a quiet leader. He was not a flashy leader, but he did express a lot of leadership, and that allowed him to get data. And that he could turn into information. Usually that's where we stop. We say, well, we get data so we can get information. No, he said you need to get knowledge. And that knowledge will inform decisions, will allow you to get results, and you keep that thing rolling. Now, this is from one of Bob's paper at the Leman's conference in 1994. I took that directly from that proceedings. And he's talking about taking a pile of data to get bits of information in order to get knowledge. But look what he wrote. You need contemplation. Who writes shit like that? We need contemplation? Discussion, replication. I was really intrigued by that because they don't teach us that when we take biostatistics classes, courses. And I figured I'm going to do what anybody would do today. I went to ChatGPT, and I asked the question, what is contemplating information in order to get knowledge in swine? I thought I would get something weird. Actually, it was not bad. 3 points stood out, okay? It said, you're referring to practical applications, continual learning, and collaboration. I thought it was remarkable and scary as hell, okay? So, essentially, a lot of you got into Bob's loop here, I believe that's his legacy. He got graduate students, he got field vets, colleagues, friends, to actually be more curious, be willing to share, have fun with him, with everybody else, so that we could optimize, get more value out of data for decision processes. At the bottom, there's a quote from Kevin Schultz. He said, Bob Morrison feels his best work is yet to come. That was in 2016. Of course, Bob didn't get to do a lot more work after that, per se. But I believe that his legacy, through his graduate students, his veterinary colleagues, many of them being here today, gets that loop to keep going. And so in a way, Bob may be right. His best work may have yet to come. That's why I gave that title in this talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre, for that great talk. That's a lot of insight for you, from you, and I'm sure that has given us a lot to think about. So we have time for questions. Yep, there's going to be a phone number showing up eventually on the screen, but we're going to start off with a very simple one. Sounds simple. I'm sure they're going to have a simple answer. So you were talking about emotional intelligence, right? And there's two questions there. And today that all of us have challenges trying to hire people or trying to retain people, but at the farm level, when we're trying to hire people, there's not a large pool of individuals out there that want to come to and work on a pig farm. So the question is, how do we select from a small pool of individuals? Question one. And two, for those individuals that are already working with us at the farm, do we have any resources on emotional intelligence so that we can retain them?
Yeah, there's different things there. As far as the United States, I don't know in terms of resource what you have directly available. I work with an industrial psychologist. You have many of them here in the U.S. as well. This particular guy I'm working with has validated a test. It's a questionnaire that's he validated it with about 1 million people in French, in English, and in Spanish. And what he's done, and he's a professor, but he's also a bit of an entrepreneur. He's got his business on the side, and he's using also artificial intelligence and all this. And what he does is it takes about an hour to figure out people's personality and emotional intelligence. And it's really scary because he tested me. And I thought, there's no bloody way in an hour I'll be able to tell who I am. And boy, when he told me, I had just met him, and he told me everything about me, and he was really right. And I thought, wow. And he said, then what I can do is I can look at this information and say, well, given who you are, how you react, I'm going to custom design a little training program for you. And he could do that in a few minutes. It was just a short, like proof of concept, took 3 minutes. And he adjusted to teach me one thing. He adjusted, and he showed me, he says, if you would have come across in a different way, this is how I would have approached it. And he had that. And we're actually going to use that for that project that we got funded by Chic. We're going to have these sensors to gather data on people, so we'll know if they comply or not, if they react to an alarm or not. Then we're going to test them, and then we're going to train them to see if we have an impact on compliance. The next step will be to see if we can keep that going for months, right? So how you, when you get an employee, you get whoever you can get very often. I recognize that. My colleague's point, the industrial psychologist, is that that's fine. I mean, you have one employee, this is all you can get, this person. Then try to figure that person out so that you can adjust how you're going to deal with that person to get the best out of this individual. he was telling me that a lot of companies are using these tests, so similar tests, to determine not only who should be hired, and in particular in positions of management. He was saying sometimes you may not be able to test everybody who's like doing like some basic work on a farm, but make sure the people who are like the technicians doing the follow-up on the farms, the manager and all that, if you can get these people tested, okay, you can work on their emotional intelligence. It will have a trickle-down effect. It will improve everybody's performance, okay? Like a coach, for example, in a sport like hockey. So that was his point. That's the way to do it. Now, what kind of support? Where is it in the United States? I'm sure you could get it, but unfortunately, I cannot give you information on this right now.
Thank you for that, Dr. Vaillancourt. You also talked about providing feedback, and you talked about these for companies. I remember there was Cargill, Google, Netflix. We always want to give feedback. We have always challenges giving feedback, but we also have one challenge that it's different cultures within a pig farm, right? What would you suggest we do from that feedback perspective? You talked about going to farms and talking about soccer and getting them to talk, but can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Okay, the first thing is compliance to biosecurity is not a cultural thing. Now, culture is important if you want to work with them to improve compliance. But my point is that there's not a culture out there that's more compliant. You would think, well, sure, the Germans or the Austrians, I mean, these people are on time. They, the Scandinavians, geez, they love rules, right? They obey the rules. And well, not necessarily on farms, okay? By and large, culture per se is not a big determinant of compliance. But you can certainly use it. So yeah, we did. Remember in North Carolina, we had a problem on a farm, a breeder farm that would get Mycoplasma gallisepticum in our case, and we didn't know where it was coming from. I happened to have a postdoc from Colombia at that time. The company had investigated, were trying to figure things out, and got nowhere. So I said, let me bring my postdoc. We'll work with you on this. And they got a guy from the main office to meet us. And sure enough, my postdoc started talking with employees about soccer. It was the World Cup at that time. And the guy from the company said, well, what the heck is going on here? We have no time for this. And I said, just let him talk. And I said, better yet, let's go for a walk. Let him do his thing. And when about half an hour later we came back, and he said, okay, you need to understand one thing. First of all, a lot of the employees are living on other farms, okay? And they commingle, they have parties. They had one 2 weekends ago with people from 8 different farms. And we got all sorts of information that allowed them to then adjust their training, get them to understand that it's okay, that they want to meet, they want to enjoy their homemade type food, and they have this desire to listen to their music and all this. You don't want to mess with that. That's being social. But he says, we got the information that allowed us to explain to them where there were risks. And he says most of these employees don't want to be responsible for a major problem, partly because they know if we have to shut down the farm to depopulate, they may lose their jobs. So that's how we approached it. So yes, culture is important, but don't think that compliance per se is a cultural thing. It's like an innate culture thing.
Last question, Dr. Vaillancourt. This is in relation with compliance, right? And there's kind of 2 questions within the same question, and it's, first, how do we measure compliance on a short term? But also, what are those 2 most effective ways to motivate your team to meet that high level of that 90, 95%, 100% compliance?
Oh yeah, the magic or silver bullet or whatever. It's not gonna happen. Okay, it's not easy. It's not simple. So the first question, the first point was about
Measure compliance.
yeah, measure compliance short term. One thing that we found, by the way, is that you know, we always say, mainly if you have visitors, you need to have somebody from the farm to be with the visitor to make sure that the rules are followed. But what we discovered is that yes, it improves compliance. You can measure it. You have somebody from the farm that's visibly, physically there. But it only works if the person's been trained for it. Because we actually monitored farms where they would have an employee be with a visitor, and compliance sometimes would go down. And we asked psychologists, how is that possible? And they said, yeah, again, we are social animals. And if the employee is not trained, and for some reason they get into a conversation, you know, about sports or whatever, they may then forget to follow some rules. So training of individuals to be with visitors is important. To monitor compliance, again, the way I define compliance is not the way you find it sometimes in the literature. A lot of people in the literature talk about compliance because, well, there's two zones. So there's biosecurity compliance. I define it as not only there's two zones, but they're being respected, okay? There's different ways that can be done, but not in any easy way. Unless you observe directly, you won't be able to know for sure who's really following or not. That's the short answer. Now, as far as motivating people, what do we know is that positive incentives is much better than negative ones. Negative ones, and you need to have some, would be, if you keep doing this, I'm gonna fire you, okay? And when it comes to that, by the way, it's important that they actually know. You would think that people would assume that if they screw up, eventually they could get fired. But when you investigate outbreaks, I did that a few times. You talk to the employees, and at the end, I always had this question. If I could prove that the reason we're in this mess is because of something you did or didn't do, what would happen to you? 50% of employees had no idea. Comes down to communication. I was telling you about the breeder, the guys, the 165 employees from an integrated companies working on breeder farms. We talked about biosecurity, and we talked about disease transmission and all that. One employee came back to us at the end and said, thank you for talking to us. And I said, what do you mean? You never had training about biosecurity before? He said, no, not that. Nobody talked to us. He said, when we were told to come here tonight, it was an evening thing, some of us thought we might get fired. They did not even tell us why we were coming here. You're the first one to actually not only like give an order, but actually talk to us and make us understand something. So if you want to really increase compliance, start by making sure that the employees understand why they're being asked to do things. You would think that they know that it's important to wash their hands. I did a study on hand washing for bird catchers. Okay, we're testing different ways of decontaminating hands. And what was interesting is half the crew was from Canada, about 20 that we tested, and another 20 that were from Guatemala, okay? I asked them things like, have you heard of salmonella? Okay, 1 out of 20 in Guatemala had heard about salmonella, Campylobacter. It was 17 out of 20 from Canada. I asked them, if you don't have to wash your hands between two flocks, is that a big deal? About 40% thought it was not a big deal. But I said, how about your health? 20% didn't see the point of washing their hands after grabbing 3,000 birds, as long as their hands were dry. You would think, wow, they're not stupid. They just didn't get the training, the information. So the number one thing is to make sure they understand they have that information. To then, after that, you give them what needs to be done. Better yet, get them to tell you what needs to be done given the information that's provided to them. And try to look at ways to have positive incentives. I've seen on farms a manager who said, okay, guys, it's the summer, it's warm, we're tired, the animals sometimes are not cooperating. If I see everybody do things right, at the end of the day, I'm going to buy the beer. And we're going to stop an hour before, and I'll pay you. You know, it's not that expensive to do that, but boy, they were motivated. And they did not mistreat the birds, because that manager was telling me, we have a history here of people who get a temper. And when they're tired, they can kick an animal, and that has consequences. So things like that needs to be done. It's simple, but it has an impact if you're just going to do a few things.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vaillancourt. On behalf of the Swine Group at the University of Minnesota, we just want to give you a little token of our appreciation for your talk, for providing so much insight, and for providing so much knowledge.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's actually useful. You know, if anybody is not happy with me, I got a weapon now. Thank you.